Welcome to Hella Good Housekeeping. I'm your host, Nat Banger, and today we're going to be starting a series on home canning. Our introduction today is going to be all about the basic process, some equipment, and I might nerd out a little bit about history. So what is canning? Basically, it's a type of food preservation where you put food into jars and you seal and sterilize it using heat. I started canning when I was about 20, and I absolutely fell in love. It was a bit overwhelming at first though, so I really like to take every opportunity I can now to make it a little more accessible for people who are just getting into it. It definitely helps to start with some pretty simple recipes for your first few sessions. So in the following episodes, we're going to be going over beginner level jam, pickles, and tomato sauce, and you can use those as a jumping off point for future recipes. I first got interested in canning as a way to keep eating local fruits and veg throughout the winter. Along the way though, I found that it's just really satisfying to be able to make prepared foods for yourself without relying on the store-bought product. It kind of counters this disconnect that we have to our food a lot of the time. It basically feels like a gift you're making for your future self, and a lot of the time it tastes better too. Especially if you have food sensitivities or allergies, being able to control what goes in your food can make a huge difference in terms of worry and hassle around label checking. I know there's this whole narrative that local food is more expensive, but I have honestly saved money on a lot of this stuff. Whether it's a fancy seeming recipe that would sell for a premium at the store but is actually made with pretty normal ingredients, or by taking advantage of the deals that you can get by buying in bulk, buying a farmer's excess produce, or buying aesthetically flawed products that can't be sold at full price. This is especially true if you live somewhere that relies on imported produce for a lot of the year, because having stuff stored away ahead of time helps save you from those price spikes that happen every time there's a little hiccup in the supply chain. And I have to say, a seriously underrated feature of home canning is the social aspect. Now, obviously, that's not really the case right now because we're in a pandemic, and so social opportunities are a little not so much. But in general, it's so much fun to get together with friends and have canning bees, have canning swaps with the stuff you've already made. You can even get competitive with it by taking your stuff to your local fair. I did this, I think, my second year of canning, and the organizers were so excited to have new people joining that I've just been hooked, and I've been going back ever since, and it's become one of my favorite activities of the year. So here's where I'm going to take a quick little second for some history. Canning was invented in 1809 in response to Napoleon's desire to find a reliable food preservation method to feed his traveling armies. It was initially called appertization after its inventor, French chef Nicolas Appert. And soon after, the process was adapted from using glass jars to sturdier metal canisters, which was then shortened to cans. And even though metal containers have never been practical for home preserving, the name did stick. If you've ever wondered why it's called canning when we don't actually use cans, I would say blame Napoleon. From the late 19th to mid-20th century, there was a ton of research on canning safety that came from institutes on domestic sciences and home economics. Now, we tend to have a pretty dim view of those subjects today, but they actually had a huge impact on our understanding of nutrition, food safety, textiles, human development, and they were also a major inroad for women working in the formal sciences. Testing methods and recipes in a controlled lab setting has led to home canning being much safer than it was in the past. There's two main techniques that we use for canning today. The first is the hot water bath method, which submerges filled jars in boiling water. The second is pressure canning, which heats jars with water in a sealed container that reaches above boiling temperatures. Both work by killing pathogens and forcing air out of the jar to create a vacuum seal. In this video, we're going to be talking about water bath canning, but eventually I'll be making a lesson on pressure canning as well. You can usually find the equipment that you need for canning at hardware stores, general stores, and kitchen supply stores. Most canning companies sell kits with everything that you need to get started. These usually aren't too pricey, but if it's still a little much, it can be a good option to share with friends or neighbors who are also interested in canning. Unfortunately, I've found it can be pretty hard to find canning equipment used, but if you do come across it, this is absolutely an option too. The jars we use today are glass mason jars. They come with a two-piece lid that consists of an outer ring and a disc. The disc can only be used once. It has a layer of sealing compound around the outside, and this tends to get warped enough during the first use that it's not reliable a second time. When the seal is formed, the disc pops down like this into the concave position, and that's how you can tell that your jar has sealed. The rings can be used multiple times until they get warped or rusty. Jars, on the other hand, you can basically reuse forever as long as they're not chipped or cracked. The good news is you can often find these used, but the downside is they're often priced higher than the new jars because they're seen as decorative items. As you can see, there's a whole range of different jar sizes. And you can also see there are two different opening sizes. This is a standard lid, and this is a wide mouth, and they're both 500 milliliters. Which you choose all depends on your own preferences, sometimes what you're putting in them. I often use a wide mouth for pickles because it's easier to grab things out of it, and a standard mouth for sauces, but that's just me. Now you can use any pot to can in, but I find it's worth getting a pot made specifically for canning. Canning pots tend to be cheaper than regular cooking pots of the same size because they're so much thinner. Only water is coming in contact with the edges of the pot. They don't need the added thickness to prevent any food from burning. This one here is the standard size that comes with most canning kits, and it can fit jars up to 500 milliliters. I also had to size up to this beast to cover some full liter jars, but it was only $30. Most canning pots will come with a wire rack like this one, and that is so that your jars sit a little bit off the bottom of the pot so that any bubbles coming up from underneath don't get trapped. Otherwise, they can rattle the jar so hard that they can crack. Racks also come with handles like this that you can hook over the sides of the pot so it'll stay raised up while you fill it. Personally, I find that actually more awkward because you see they've got all these big gaps in them. I find my jars always tip over, so I just leave it at the bottom. You can also see that it's quite rusty because this guy is quite old. I am about to replace it with this beautiful new thing. As you can see, the wire is a lot closer together than it is on that other one. It's got these little loops that support the jars and also wider ones for bigger jars. So I'm really looking forward to seeing this because I think my jars won't tip as much, and I'm really looking forward to testing it out. So the next piece of equipment we're going to look at is our jar lifter. These are usually included in any kits that you get, and you can also buy them independently. This is the basic set. As you can see, it's just made of wire that's coated with a bit of rubber. It just wraps around the neck of your jar like that, and it makes it nice and safe as you put it in your pot and take it out. So those are the basic ones. I think it's really, really worth it to sort of step up a bit and get these guys. They're a little more shaped. I find there's a lot less risk of dropping your jar. I find them much, much easier to work with. Next we have our funnel, and as you can see, it's like a nice big wide funnel. It fits exactly in a standard mouth, and it also flares out so that you can fit it in a wide mouth as well. And this allows you to fill your jars way more easily and way more quickly. We also have this guy, that's our magnetic lid lifter, and it just lifts them up nice and easily so you can just place your lids on here when your jars are all hot. And this one is usually included in your basic canning kit as well. The last piece that's usually included is your headspace gauge. I have lost mine, so I'm going to graphically add it. And the headspace gauge measures how much air you're leaving in the jar in order to make a proper vacuum seal. Now we're going to go over the steps of the canning process. The first thing we do is sterilize our jars. And we do that by putting just the jars, no lids, into a pot of water and bringing it to a boil for at least 10 minutes. We don't want to boil the lids because that would damage the sealing compound. They only boil once while they're sealing. We turn down the pot. We don't want it at a full rolling boil when we are going to get our jars out of it. You can turn it down so that our jars are just staying hot. We want it a little calmer when we pull our jars out, just so we don't burn ourselves. When we want to take our jars out, you use your jar tongs. We lift our jar and pour out the extra water and place it on a clean dish towel so that we aren't spilling water everywhere. And before we start filling our jars, we start warming up the lids in hot but not boiling water. Boiling water will damage the sealing compound, but hot water just warms it up so it's nice and soft and ready to sit right onto the jar. We fill up our jars with the jar funnel, we pour in whatever we've got, and we would measure the headspace that we've got. You can do this with a headspace gauge, it would be much easier. I've lost mine, as I said. Say I want 1/4 inch of headspace. I would just measure from the top, see if it lines up with that or if it needs a bit more or a bit less. And then I would either top it up or take a little bit out. Then we go and make sure that there's no air pockets trapped underneath. And we do that either with a little spatula, maybe a chopstick. Most headspace gauges also have an opposite end that can be used for this. The important thing is that it's not metal because that can chip the jar. So we just scoop in and kind of scrape whatever tool you're using around the outside of the jar. That just gives a little passage for any trapped air pockets to escape. And then after we've done that, we just check again. Make sure it's still the right headspace and it wasn't taken up with any air or false headspace. The reason the headspace is important is that we need that little air pocket because as we boil the filled jars, that air is going to expand and escape out of the jar. And then once it cools and contracts again, that gives us our vacuum seal. So we don't want it to be too much or too little because that might not seal properly. So once we know that's right, we take our nicely warmed up lids. We don't touch the underside, we just grab it. It should be about 10 minutes or so that it's been warming up. We pop it on there, we release it. It might need a little bit of adjusting, but usually it sits just square. And then we put the ring on to secure it. And we don't put it all the way tight, we put it finger tight, which is just to the point of resistance. Basically, if you're holding the jar and the lid both just with your fingertips, this is as far as you can go before you have to really adjust your grip in order to comfortably close it anymore. So we have our jars all ready. We just pick them up, put them back in our nice warm canning pot. It's still not at a full boil again yet. We've kept it on low so that we can safely place our jars. You might have to scoop out some water because we're adding a lot of extra volume. Before it was boiling just the empty jars, now it's got all the full jars. Once they're all in there, we pop a lid back on, we turn it back to full, bring it back up to a rolling boil, and only once it's at a full boil do we start counting the time. Your canning recipe will tell you how long you should process your jars, which means how long it should be at a full boil. One extra thing to be aware of here is your altitude. If you're more than 1,000 feet above sea level, you'll need to add extra processing time. And there are charts you can find to tell you exactly how much that would be for you. So the reason that we need to boil this is that we are sterilizing it, we are killing the pathogens within it, with one big exception. Boiling temperatures alone don't kill the bacteria that causes botulism. It can survive boiling temperatures, it can survive in an environment with no oxygen, but what it can't survive is acidic environments. And that is why hot water bath canning is only appropriate for high acid recipes like jams, like pickles, like certain sauces. Low acid recipes, you need to cook at a higher temperature in a pressure canner. That's why it's really important to only use tested recipes for the type of canning that you're doing. So now that we've reached the end of our processing time, once again, we turn our pot down and we let it calm down a little bit before we take our jars out, just so we're not burning ourselves on the boiling water. And once again, it's just a matter of lifting them out with our jar lifters, placing them on that clean tea towel. And now it's important that we leave our jars for about 24 hours without disturbing them, especially without tipping them. If you really have to move them, you kind of carefully, very, very carefully, try to move them with as little disturbance as possible, but try to keep them still for about 24 hours while the seal stabilizes. As they cool, you're going to hear that lovely little sound. That's a good sign that your jars have sealed. And if one of your jars hasn't done that, do not try to force it by pressing that down. That's not going to be a safe seal. That's not going to be shelf stable. So now our jars are nice and sealed. They've stabilized for 24 hours. Before we go put them away, there's a couple of steps we want to do. First, we need to test the seal to make sure it is strong. We do that by taking off the ring, which was actually just holding this in place while it's sealed. And we can actually just lift the jar up just by the disc. If it is really sealed, it can do that no problem. If it comes off, that means it didn't seal properly. If that happens, you can check it for chips or cracks and reprocess it, or you can just put it in the fridge and eat it fresh. So once we know it's got a strong seal, we then wipe off any residue that might have come out of the jar as it was processing. This happens a lot with jam. It can get kind of sticky under there. If we leave any of that on there, it can get really gross. You don't want any of that getting into your food once you open it. You also want to clean the rings. You can put it back on for storage, but it's really not necessary. You can see here I've got a label on this. It's really important to label your canned goods so you don't get them mixed up with each other. Even if you don't make very much, you'd be surprised how quickly you can get confused. Make sure at the very least it says what's inside and the month and the year you made it. Now to store these, it can be easiest to just keep them in the boxes the jars came in, but if that's broken down or gotten lost, you can keep them in all kinds of crates. You want to keep them somewhere that's pretty dark, it's fairly cool, So traditionally that would be something like a root cellar, but just a basement or a pantry or anything like that is also great. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you learned a thing or two about canning. I look forward to seeing you next time on Hella Good Housekeeping as we dive into those recipes.